Hi, and welcome to session 3, where we're going to be talking about technology and oral language development for ELs. You're going to start off this module by watching a video of kids reacting to old computers. I'd like to start this session with this video especially because it really highlights the fact that at the core of it, technology is a tool. Just like markers, paper, textbooks, calculators, it's a tool. And just like you would not plan a lesson around calculators or markers, we can't plan a lesson around specific devices. We need to really focus on pedagogy first. And when we focus on pedagogy first and helping students learn how and why they're learning, then that learning is going to be more meaningful than if we just teach them the what, the facts, how to use a device, because eventually that device is going to be old, just like these old computers are super old now. But if we focus on the pedagogy and the message we're sending the students and using the technology to enhance that, then that learning is going to be more timeless. Then you're going to get into the readings for this module. I'd like you to read them in this order because they're really going to build upon one another. Then you will watch this video, the session 3 video. You can reference the session 3 slides during the video or after the video. They're always going to be there for you. After we've gone through the lesson, you're going to head over to Flipgrid and answer a discussion question that's prompted in the last slide of the PowerPoint, and it's also on Flipgrid, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You have no technology product for this session, but I do want you to reflect on your use of Flipgrid. So I'd like you to go to the technology application reflection, and I want you to reflect on how you've been using Flipgrid and how you think you could use it with your students, and especially your EL students. Finally, here are some extra oral language articles and resources and some other resources for things we're going to talk about in the slides. And so those are there just in case you find this section interesting and you want to dive into it a little bit more. There's tons of resources there for you. The graded activities for this module are your Flipgrid discussion and your technology reflection. And here's how to access those and submit those. And finally, some information about hyperducts if you're interested in learning more about those. So now we're going to transition to the slides for this week. Here we are beginning our talk about technology and oral language development. Now, modules 3 and 4 really work hand in hand because they talk about oral language development and reading. And what we're going to see is that in order for EL students to really develop a strong sense of reading, they have to have a strong sense of oral language and very competent oral language skills. So this is really a key skill that our students need to develop, and we can use technology to do it really effectively. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into the research and the theory and practice of developing oral language with EL students. That's something that's covered in foundation and methods, so we don't really need to rehash that. What we're going to talk about today is how can we take those things you learned in foundations and methods about oral language development and instruction for ELs and pair it with technology to make that instruction much more effective. So we know that oral language is the foundation that reading and writing is built on. No one ever learned a language without the opportunity to talk. This quote by Loban here that says, we listen a book a day, we talk a book a week, we read a book a month, and write a book a year. And I think this really draws attention to the fact that we talk and listen all day long, every day. We talk and listen a lot more than we read and write, yet in schools, the focus and emphasis tends to be on reading and writing, and oral language is left behind. And usually it's kind of left behind to develop on its own because people think that it'll just come, and that's some things you just know how to do. But that's not really the case, even for native English speakers. everyone needs to develop strong oral language skills because it helps solidify those literacy skills, that literacy foundation that we need. There are 5 components of oral language: phonology, morphology, semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. A student's phonological skills are those that give him or her an awareness of the sounds of the language, like sounds of syllables and rhymes. In addition to being an important part of oral language development, phonological skills play a foundational role in supporting word reading development or decoding development. In the early stages of learning how to read words, children are often encouraged to sound out the words. But before they can even be able to match sounds to letters, they need to be able to hear the distinct sounds and understand those discrete sounds that make up a language. Next is morphology, which refers to the smallest meaningful parts from which words are created. This includes roots, suffixes, and prefixes. When a reader stumbles upon an unfamiliar word, an awareness of how a particular prefix or suffix might change the meaning of the word, or how 2 words with the same root may relate in meaning to each other, like predict, predictable, unpredictable, supports a student's ability to infer the word's meaning. In fact, for both ELs and monolingual English speakers, there's a reciprocal relationship between morphological awareness and reading comprehension. And the strength of that relationship increases as students develop literacy skills. Syntax refers to the understanding of word order and grammatical rules. For example, if we had the following 2 sentences. Sentence 1, relationships are preserved only with care and attention. Sentence 2, only with care and attention are relationships preserved. In those 2 sentences, even though the word order is different, those sentences mean the same thing. That's syntactic knowledge. In other cases, syntactic knowledge will tell us that even a slight change in word order will alter a sentence's meaning. So if I have a sentence that's, the swimmer passed the canoe, if I make a small change and say the canoe passed the swimmer, those are 2 totally different sentences. I know I'm jumping around and I apologize, but we're going to go to pragmatics next. And that refers to the understanding of the social rules of communication. So, for example, pragmatics involves how we talk when we have a particular purpose. So are we persuading someone versus informing someone or versus appeasing someone? It's how we communicate when we're engaging with a particular audience. So are we talking to a family member or are you talking to your boss? And what we say when we find ourselves in a particular context. So engaging in just a casual conversation versus delivering a speech. So these often implicit social rules of communication differ across content areas and even text genres. Pragmatics plays a role in reading comprehension because much of making meaning from the text depends on having the right idea about norms and conventions for interacting with others, and how you're going to understand feelings and reactions and dilemmas among the characters or populations, and even how you make predictions and inferences. So the reader has to be part of the social world of the text for effective comprehension. Finally, we're going to talk about semantics. Semantic knowledge is also sometimes referred to as vocabulary knowledge. And we know that having the words to engage in dialogue, or vocabulary knowledge, is a key part of oral language. Not to mention comprehending and communicating using print. So vocabulary knowledge, or your semantic knowledge, involves understanding the meanings of words and phrases, which is your receptive vocabulary, and using those words and phrases to communicate effectively. That's your expressive vocabulary. Vocabulary knowledge exists in degrees, so any learner has a particular level of knowledge of a given word. This begins with the word sounding familiar and moves all the way toward ability to use words flexibly, metaphorically, and in speech and print. Vocabulary knowledge has to be fostered from the introduction to language, because deep vocabulary knowledge is often a source of difficulty for ELs, and it hinders their literacy development, it's really important that we pay attention to this semantic component of oral language. When we look at these technology tools and strategies to support oral language with ELs, there's going to be a little speech bubble in the slide that prompts us to think about how is this tool or strategy strengthening phonology? How is it strengthening morphology, semantics, syntax, and pragmatics? One strategy or tool may not address all 5 areas, and that's okay, but we need to think about the entire curriculum as a whole and our entire teaching repertoire as a whole. And are we making sure that students are developing all 5 areas of oral language? So that's what that little button or bubble is going to prompt you to think about. I may not always reference it, but you know it's there and you can do that thinking on your own. So you read the Let Them Talk article by Wayne Wright, and in that article he highlights a couple key points. I picked out 4 of them. Bring ELs into the discussion, encourage speaking and listening throughout the day, let them communicate in small groups, and focus your instruction and make sure you're having meaningful interactions with students and they're having meaningful language interactions. Those are the key points that I used when I drew these strategies and put them together with these technology tools. So this is the basis for the tools and strategies I selected to show you. The first tool we're going to talk about is Talking Tom, and there are a lot of things out there that will do a similar purpose. I'm just using Talking Tom because it's the one I used to use with students. And what Talking Tom is a cat that repeats everything you say back to you in an annoying voice. And what was great about that for ELs is that they needed to hear themselves speak and to hear themselves read, to hear the phonemes, to practice those phonological skills, the morphological skills. They needed to hear the phrasing and the intonation, but they often were pretty self-conscious about reading in front of me or other students. So they would read to Tom and he'd repeat back what they said to him, and they would hear, oh, that sounded, I took a really big pause, or it's not very fluid, or I pronounced that wrong, or I don't know really how to pronounce that. So they would be able to have that feedback, kind of like a whisper phone that you see in younger grades. But this was a quick and easy way to do that. And we're going to watch a video at the end that has a little clip of students using Talking Tom, and I'll try to highlight that when it comes up so you can see it in action. Next, we're going to talk about using an avatar to help students talk. And the example I'm going to show you is Telegami. And Telegami is an app, but there's other options, and I'm going to show you a web version next. But in the Telegami app, students build an avatar, and then they record their voice, but the avatar's mouth is the one that moves. So this really makes ELs feel safe when they're practicing oral language, because they can speak and they can practice and record and re-record, and it's not their face in front. They don't have to put their face in front of others. They don't have to make themselves that vulnerable. So if there's a mistake, it's the avatar who's saying the mistake. So it really kind of protects them and gives them that safety and that security that you need to really play with language and practice language. So let's take a look at an example of a 2nd grade Telegami.
Hello, Miss Emily. Today I read a book named Ant and Grasshopper. I like this part because Ant helped Grasshopper, and the Grasshopper became the friend of Ant.
So you can see the student is talking, but it's the avatar's mouth moving, and that student gets to practice oral language, talking to the teacher, and that teacher can actually have a lot of students talking to her at the same time, and then she can go back and listen to them and really pay attention to them rather than having 30 kids just talking to you at once. In the corner, I highlighted some similar tools that are the same aspects, talking through an avatar. So Sock Puppets, Voki, Chatterpix Kids, Puppet Pals, these all do the same thing. Blabberize is a web version of talking through an avatar. So in Blabberize, you select a picture and upload it, and then you draw where you want the mouth to be, and then you record what you want that mouth to say. So I've created an example for a demo lesson I did a couple years ago about the Egyptian pyramids. So this is the Egyptian pyramids telling you why you should come visit them. And this is my voice you'll hear. I think you should visit the ancient Egyptian pyramids because they are the most well-known pyramids in the world. Most of the ancient Egyptian pyramids were built as tombs for pharaohs and their families. Did you know that over 130 pyramids have been discovered in Egypt, and that each pyramid took 20 to 30 years to build? That's a long time. That's why I think you should visit the ancient Egyptian pyramids. So you get the point. I drew where I wanted the mouth to be, and I talked about why you should come visit the pyramids. So this could be an alternative to having students read about the pyramids and then stand up and tell the whole group why they think they should visit the pyramids. If students create a Blabberize video, they have that opportunity to get their thoughts together, to practice and re-record if necessary, and then you can show all of the videos to the class and really focus in on what the students are saying. And it's not them putting themselves out there and being vulnerable. They feel safe so that they can really have that room to grow. This tool is one of my favorites, and we are also going to talk about it in the next session, but this is Google Arts and Culture, which is a partnership Google has with nearly every museum in the world. So this is a treasure trove of things that you can use to generate conversation and to talk about with your students. So that's why I bring it up in this session, because it is such a wealth of information. So you can find different artists, different mediums, art movements, historical events, historical figures, different places. So we just talked about Egypt. Actually, let's just search. And if I'm talking to my students about, if we're learning about Egypt and I want them to practice oral language, I've got a lot of stuff here to do. An Egyptian doll. These are related. Here are some user galleries. I could go in a tour of an ancient Egyptian exhibit in the UK. I could also look at all of this 10,000 different items. It's a lot to go through. Or I could just look about Egypt and learn more about that. So I could talk to my students about any one of these, start talking and describing them and brainstorming where we think they came from or why they were created. There's really no limit to it. And what's very cool, and I'm going to show you, let's go to Van Gogh right here. And we know Van Gogh's Starry Night. We can see an exhibit about this, and we can zoom in and take a tour through this painting and talk about it with students. What I can also do is, let's see, there we go. Let's jump into Starry Night, and this is with almost every item, picture, painting, tapestry, sculpture, pottery. Okay. You can zoom in to the gigapixel level and really see the brushstrokes and the cracks in the painting. Sometimes you can see that the artist painted with really hard, you can tell, were they angry or really emphatic? So these are all things you can talk about with students. So this is why I bring up Google Arts and Culture. We are going to talk a little bit more about it in the next session. So we will come back to it and revisit my favorite place, Google Arts and Culture. this is Google Voice, and Google Voice is one of the lesser known tools in the Google Suite, and I love it. And I was using it like years ago. I saw it at a Google Summit, probably the first Google Summit I went to, and it was a presentation by a foreign language teacher, and this is how she got her high school students ready to take the AP language test. And I was like, well, I can use this for my students. And so what Google Voice is you can go onto Google, and there's the URL, and you can just get a phone number with any area code you want. You just get a phone number assigned to you. It doesn't cost money. You don't need an actual phone or a cell phone or anything. You just get the number. And you go into the settings, and you set it so that nothing rings, it doesn't forward, it doesn't go to your email, your text, or anything. You don't want it to do anything. You just want it to have a voicemail. And what you can do is record, for the voicemail message, you record an oral language speaking prompt for your students. And then the assignment is that your students have to call your Google Voice phone number and listen to the prompt and answer it. It really is authentic use of language because they don't know what the prompt is going to be, and that's how real life language is. If someone walks up to me, I don't know what they're going to say. Don't know what they're going to ask me. I don't know what they're going to talk to me about. I have to make adjustments on the fly, and that's what we want our students to be practicing. I use this in my class with my students when I was in the classroom, and this was a weekly assignment, so it was something they knew they always had to do by Thursday morning. So on usually Thursday afternoon, I would go to Google Voice, I would change my voicemail message to a new oral language prompt, and then I just leave it. Over the next week, the students at some point had to call, listen to the voicemail prompt, and respond after the beep. Sometimes they just thought about it for a while. Sometimes they listened and hung up, listened and hung up, listened and hung up 10 times until I showed them that if you go to voice.google.com, it shows me every time someone has called, listened to the voicemail message, and hung up. So I know that someone was doing that. But what you can do is then you go into your Google Voice account and you can just click play on all of those voicemails, and then you have oral language samples for all of your students. And if you do this, weekly, bi-weekly, every month, you can have oral language samples that show their progression of language. I'm going to show you some examples from when I was in the classroom. This was one of my students answering, "What's your favorite book?" So what we had practiced in our class was when you called, you had to say, "This is so-and-so," and then start your answer, because I was not going to memorize all their phone numbers, and they called from 100 different numbers every time. So they had to say this. So she said, "This is Jaylene," and she told me about her favorite book, and we practiced. You have to say something, then you have to back it up. Tell me why. So if I were working with her now, I would say, I really, when I met with her, I really liked your answer, and I like Bad Kitty too. But when you told me why you like it, you said, "and that stuff." I don't know what that stuff is. You got to tell me and describe it so that I want to read it. So here I'm really targeting my oral language instruction to where she is at the moment. Okay, so here was a question. What was your favorite part of our trip to the Field Museum? So if I was working with him, we would definitely work on being a little bit more clear, and hearing those phonemes, separating them, and knowing how they flow together. This example is, what's your favorite thing to do on the iPad? I just like that one so much because he's really trying and stretching to say why he likes it and tell me and make me want to play that game. But sometimes that's all, and then hangs up. So we would talk about, let's speak a little clearer. How can we, when we don't know what to say, what are some of our strategies? Because if you're talking to someone and you can't find the words, you can't just go say, okay, and then turn around and leave them there. You have to have some kind of strategy, and that's what we would work on. What did you have for lunch today? If you could change one thing about school, what would it be? Okay. And finally, what would you do if you had $1 million? So I think she just starts talking to her brother there. But so what we can see from all of these different oral language samples is that in one class you can't just teach one thing about oral language. Some students need help with the actual speaking part of it and making sure that they're clear and they enunciate and I can hear the words that they're saying. But the content is there. And some students are very clear speakers, but the content isn't there. Like the girl who said, I would change the classroom. It was very clear, but I don't know why she would want to change the classroom, so we would have to work on that content. So this allows me to really target what I want to work on with students. So you can try this. You can go to my number right here. You can call it, listen to the prompt, and you can answer it if you want. That's up to you. And one thing I do want to point out is that all of these prompts are more social language. There's a little bit of academic language being woven in. And that's because when I'm working on oral languages students, you really want to meet them where they're at. And this is where my students were at. Over the course of the year, we progressed and we threw in more academic language questions. So what is something you learned in science? Or describe the difference between solids and gases. What is something you learned in math today? Can you tell me the difference between a whole number and a fraction? Something to that effect. So you can choose the level of the prompts you want. Okay, so the next activity is another one of my favorites. It's closed songs. So if you took a foreign language in high school, there's a good chance, that you at some point had to listen to a cassette tape or a CD or whatever, depending on your age, of a story or someone reading something, and you had to follow along and fill in the blanks where the words were missing. That's a closed activity. That, I remember, was horribly boring for me because the song or the story wasn't great and it just wasn't fun for me. But I found an old ESL book where they had different closed songs, and it was these ones actually right here. So it was the Carpenters, the Beatles. And so I got the songs on YouTube, and I would play them for students, and they would listen to the songs, and they would fill in the words. So we would listen to songs, and they loved this. They were into it. And at the end of it, everyone was like, well, I didn't finish it. I got to hear it again. We would end up listening to each song 4 or 5 times, right? And you know what they were doing as they were listening to that song 4 or 5 times? They were reading English, hearing English, separating those phonemes and morphemes into words, and they were hearing the separation of words. They were getting all of that oral language input, and they had no idea they were learning anything. So I have an example of my students doing this. And so there are two sets of closed songs because my students ran through the first set pretty fast. So I had to create my own. So I had to find songs that were appropriate, catchy, but that students didn't already know because I don't want them accessing their memory, right? So I'm not going to pick a Justin Bieber song. I'm not going to, pick Old MacDonald Had a Farm because it's a song they'd be accessing by memory. I needed them to have to hear the song to figure out what the word is and really listen to that. So you can have sets of those songs. So what it looked like is I would, give students this and then they would play. So this is a really great activity that really strengthens those listening skills. And it allows, like if you want to sing along, it shows that you're kind of being fun and vulnerable and, you're taking chances so they can take chances too. But it also, music activates a different part of the brain. And I had students who really struggled with hearing sounds in English and being able to make sounds in English and read in English, but they really loved this activity and excelled in it. And it's because they were musical thinkers. They thought a different way and it activated the part of their brain that was the strongest, and it was really cool. So I'll play you a little bit of these clips of old groups of students. The next tool we're going to look at is from the New York Times Learning section. And a lot of people don't know about the New York Times Learning section, but it's fantastic, and especially for older students and older ELs. So one of the sections they have is called What's Going On in This Picture. This is a great oral language activity. And so what it does is it picks really intriguing and vague pictures from their the past, from current issues of the New York Times, and they take away the captions and they ask students to discuss what is going on in this picture. So this is the February 10th edition, and it says, look closely at this picture, stripped of the caption, and join the moderated conversation about what you and other students see. So whether or not you join the moderated discussion, just having the discussion with your students about what is going on in this picture is pretty important. And it does give you, if you go into that article, you can pull up a really clear version of the picture, but it gives you some prompts you can ask your students. It gives you some visual thinking strategies. So every Monday, they post a new picture. And then on Thursday, they tell us what the caption is and what's the context, and then teach us a little bit about that. So we don't know if we, let's go to the past. So let's go February 3rd. Here is what's going on in this picture. And we can see what's going on in this picture. We can have the talk with students. Why do you think that? What clues from the picture are you using? What knowledge, background knowledge are you bringing to this? And then after, on Thursday, they tell us what the reveal is. So it's a dramatic depiction of a facet of the Prohibition era, which began 100 years ago last month. And then it gives you the article and explains what happened. So they're destroying stills and moonshining equipment here. So then you can talk about, what's prohibition, what's moonshining. So you can see this is geared towards older students, but that's not to say you couldn't create the same activity for younger students. Pick a picture from the internet or from, a sports game or from pop culture, from a book, and have students talk about what they think is happening and then do a reveal about what is going on in that picture. Next is information gap activities. And I like pairing traditional information gap activities, which is a tried and true ESL strategy, with some newer innovative technology. So if we take something like a digital whiteboard and, you might have show me or explain everything. There's a lot of them. And this one is a free one. And it's called Sketchpad. and this is what it looks like. And so you can get it on an iPad, on a Chromebook, but it's a free, pretty comprehensive whiteboard sketch pad that you can use colors with, text. So what you do with an information gap activity is that someone has information and they have to use oral language to communicate that information to someone who needs it. So sometimes you'll see them called barrier activities or driver navigator, two-way tasks. So you could have, let's say you're learning about the CIL, you could turn something into an oral language activity where one student is the drawer and the other is the describer. So one student gets a picture of a CIL and has to describe it to the other student who has to draw it. And they have to use oral language to ask clarifying questions and to figure out what the actual CIL looks like. And then at the end, they can see how similar the drawing was to the actual original picture. So that's one example. Another example is just a more general activity. Just give them any picture and have the student describe it. You can do this with some other things. I used to do it with a coding app. And so we had like a little coding app, and you had to build like, you had to take crates and place them on top of each other and to mimic a picture. And so one person was the driver and the other was the navigator. One person got to touch the iPad and actually play the game and move it, but the other person had to tell them what to do. So the other person was the eyes and the brain, one person was the hands. So the person who was touching the iPad had to do what the navigator said. So they had to use more prepositions, move it up, move it to the left, move it to the right, no lower, higher, different things like that. And so that was an activity or an example of taking an information gap activity, but infusing the technology to keep it fresh and to help students use targeted vocabulary. And if you're not familiar with information gap activities, I included about 4 links that have tons of examples of information gap activities. Now, these aren't technology-based information gap activities. They're just general information gap activities, but you can definitely infuse technology into any one of them to fit your curriculum or fit your students or just keep it interesting. Finally, we're going to talk about making videos. So making videos has come a long way since the time when people carried around ginormous video cameras on their shoulder, like my dad did for most of my childhood, following me around at baseball games and vacations. So you don't need to be, taking VHS tapes in and out of this giant machine on your shoulder. It's so much easier to make videos now. WeVideo is super easy. I used to use YouTube Capture app with students to make videos, but really the video camera app on your most phones and tablets works awesome as well. So I included some links about making videos with students, and really making videos with students, there's too much to talk about in this time period, and I want you to be able to have some time to go through these links to look and see the different, the range of different activities you can do with making a video. And I think this is really key because number one, we're talking about oral language practice. You can't get that by writing. And yet we always try to turn everything into a writing assignment in U.S. education. If they don't write something down, then it's not a real, actual work. But oral language is work. It needs to be developed. And, making videos are a great way to do it because students get to then watch them back and they can see how they did and they can hear how they sound and critique themselves and make adjustments accordingly. And so I want you to take some time, take a look at these articles, see what's out there. But also it's important to just, give your students a different outlet to express themselves, right? Writing isn't, for everyone, especially if you're learning English and you haven't developed that skill really strongly yet. You need other outlets to express your English that you're learning and your feelings and your ideas. And so video making is a really great way of doing that. There's a lot of tools to make videos. But my students made a video. This was a long time ago. I think it's 2013. But they made a video for our Board of Education about how we used iPads in our classroom, because we were the first classroom to pilot this in the district. And so I didn't give them any guidance. I said, you know, the adults who bought us these want to know how you use them. And they want to know, like, my rules, and they want to know how it works in our class. And this was a small class. The class was newcomers and students with lower levels of English. And then other kids came and went if they needed some instruction in Spanish. So there was a mix of students here, and they go from grades 3 to 6 in this video. But I only filmed the first intro things where they're all standing and they didn't film. But other than that, they filmed this video and I just helped them put it together and publish it. So take a look at this as one example of how your students can be creative and practice oral language with videos.
Welcome to Northeast School. We are Miss Sassy's class. This is how we use our iPads.
Every morning we do morning check-in to tell Miss Sassy how we're feeling, and if we want to talk to her without nobody else knowing, and pick her lunch.
We use the iPad for accelerated reader test to get in the wall. We use the iPads for make comics and practice more English. Every Monday when we come to the school, we always open our iPads to do weekend deals.
We use Google to find our pictures and
We read music for practice reading.
We like teaching the little kids how to use the iPads.
Make another one. We use the iPad for practice fluency.
I can give me some money. I am sorry, said the chief, but I have.
We use the iPads to answer questions about books.
We could play online with friends.
We can learn antonyms and synonyms and homonyms and still have fun. You get it, Miss Suzy? Good.
We press the Mac and learn to pass document.
We use Show Me as a slate and we record ourselves doing math problems.
All of our math tools are on the iPads.
The iPad calculator is much bigger than normal calculator, like 5 times 5 equals 25. We use the tablet to find out what happened on this day in history. We use the iPads to look up things on the map. I use Google Earth to see my old house in Puerto Rico. But the iPads are not toys. Versace has some rules. Charge your iPad when there's 20%.
Use the iPad with your two hands.
Share your iPad at lunch.
And you have to put it in your desk when you leave.
You can only have 5 pictures in your iPad.
Don't change your background. Do not delete or move game.
Don't have your headphones too loud.
Don't take pictures of the teacher in secret. Sometimes we have to go old school.
Finally, after you've taken some time to digest these slides, do the readings, I'd like you to go to Flipgrid and choose one of the following prompts to respond to. You don't have to do both, you just have to record your answer to one of these prompts, and then also respond to one classmate. And that's going to be your graded part for this. And I want you then to go and fill out the application write-up form about Flipgrid. I want you to think about how we've been using Flipgrid as adults in a learning environment and how you think you could use it with your students and your ELs. So kind of have that thought, go through that. That's all you have to turn in this week. And if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in session 4. Thank you.